All right, we are finally coming to our last unit. This first one, we're going to start with um, evolution. So I'm actually going to mix in. This is usually again 2 days worth of notes, and I'm going to try to get it in as fast as possible. But so what we're going to be learning about is explain the early conditions of Earth, explain the ideas of how Earth came here. So here's the history. So they're trying to say the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. All right. Then, in the beginning, the Earth's atmosphere was very hot. This is what the Earth is supposedly supposed to look like. It was so hot, it was just a big old volcano, molten lava, volcanic gas, or whatever. And a lot of these gases eventually dried out, and about 3.9 billion years ago, and cooled down. And all of a sudden, the first single-celled organisms began to appear. What are the first single-celled organisms? Well, doesn't mind if you ask me, but that's called prokaryotes. But how do we know stuff was here? Fossils, right? That's how we supposedly know dinosaurs walked this earth. So during the last 3.9 billion years, many organisms have developed, but also 99% of those are extinct today. I don't see no big old dinosaur walking, and if I did, I would be going the opposite way. So some of them died in just the right conditions to form fossils. That's how we know things was once existed. That same chicken bone that you ate and threw out the window is a fossil, and we realize that that chicken once lived. Somebody's going to catch it 100 years from now and say, pick up that chicken bone, and said, man, somebody was doing some good eating on this chicken. Fossils provide evidence of organisms that existed. So many fossils, of course, this is what you need to know where fossils are found at in sedimentary rock layers, sedimentary rock areas. Okay, there are many types of fossils. So we have molds, casts, amber, petrified trace, imprints. So this is like you have a mold. Um, we have casts, so it's like something's covering it. Amber, if you ever remember watching Jurassic Park, there was the mosquito was found in amber, the sap, and that's how they were able to recreate the dinosaurs. They had petrified and trace imprints. Now, age of fossils. How do we understand the age of fossils? Well, Hutton and Lyell pretty much recognized that, hey, the Earth is billions of years old, and the Earth has changed in the past, but there's some things that present kind of processes that operate the same today, which is the older things, as you see here, relative dating, are at the bottom, but over time, erosion that caused them to go up. And the farther it is down, obviously, the older it is. So technically, the present is the key to the past because we have the opportunity now and the materials to go back to the past. So how do we do this? It's the law of relative dating, and it's a geological law that says that the oldest are found in the lowest layers of the sedimentary rock. So usually it goes like this, but once erosion happens, this is why some things come back up and then it goes back down again. Radiometric dating. We also do this by where the radioisotopes break down into new stable substances over time. So this is where half-lives come into play. Nothing that you have to worry about now, but if you took it in chemistry, you would understand. So the geological time scale. So this is just a visual representation of evolutionary times and basically broke down by the major events that occurred. So the Precambrian period to where we're living at now. Okay? So the organisms that survive will continue to live on, whereas some of those who were not fit to survive were not. So what happens is the best suited to withstand the environment will live on. And those we call the survival of the fittest. If you're fit to live, you're going to live. Like if it got 20 degrees in here, no, let's just say negative 20 degrees. Some people be like, I'm going to go home. And let's say I had $1,000,000 sitting on my table. $1,000,000. And I say, whoever can sustain with just one hamburger in that cold for a negative 20 for 2 days, who could do it? A lot of people be like, it's too cold. People don't like the cold. Like me, I wouldn't do it because I hate the cold. And you would give it up because you was not fit for that environment. There are some people, if you ever watched like Naked and Afraid, or you ever watched Survivor, or even watched the show Alone from the History Channel, these people are out there in 20-degree weathers because they're trying to win this money. But if you're fit to survive, you make it. Some people, they quit on the first day. So getting back to how they thought this whole earth and life was created. The first thing was spontaneous generation, and that's also known as abiogenesis. This means that life came from non-living things. Okay, let's tell you basically, this is just ours and an idea. You got dirty clothes, you got food, and after a few days, they turn into mice. No, you just nasty and dirty, and mice came to your house. That's what happened. Um, so abiogenesis means that life came from non-living things. Like you just telling me it's not living at all, and we just came here from that chair. Eventually, it's gonna turn into a human. Nah, that's not it. So Francisco Redi tested the spontaneous generation by using decaying meat to generate maggots. So he left the jar open of meat. Obviously, flies gonna come. And maggots is going to form in the meat. Why? Because it wasn't covered up. That's disgusting. Here, you cover it up with a cheesecloth, basically like a little net. The flies can still lay eggs, and the larvae will still fall through the holes and get on that meat. But when you get into a closed jar, you know what? The meat just got rotten, but it never grew maggots. Life never came from meat. So when people be like, "Oh, fried chicken at KFC, I opened it up and had worms," no, it didn't. Unless they had that out there in like this, then yes. But if it was closed up like it's supposed to be, then no, impossible. So scientists still thought that the microorganisms basically just kind of had this spontaneous vital force. So Louis Pasteur showed that microorganisms do not arise, and that I don't care what you say, he said that don't happen. Spontaneous generation was disproven. Me, I can tell you off the bat, like if a chair turned into a person, go ahead and count me out. Then they had this thing by Alexander Oparin, a Russian scientist. He said, "This is how I think life formed on Earth." And he used primordial soup. So you can actually read the slide, but basically, in words that you can understand, he was like, man, there was a bad storm in the atmosphere, right? And he was like, it caused a chemical reaction. Once they had a chemical reaction, little proteins, amino acids came falling from the sky. And when it hit water, it formed life. So you telling me if I throw a piece of meat outside in the water, that meat gonna turn back into a creature? That's primordial soup. So Miller and Urey was American scientists who basically tried to simulate the same thing he did. Sidney Fox showed us how first cells must have occurred by protocells. Basically, protocells is where we said that, as you see, eukaryotes and prokaryotes, endosymbiotes, that could carry out life activities such as growth and division. So he was like protocells with the cell divisions. This is how it happened. Well, formation of the first true cells. Um, Most single cell prokaryotes have no nucleus because they don't have a nucleus. And anaerobic member means ana is basically no, and aerobic means oxygen. Archaebacteria lives in harsh environments and make their own food by chemosynthesis and rather than photosynthesis, because if it's in harsh environments, it has to make it by the chemicals that's being radiated from the impurities around them. Then supposedly they came from the chemicals and became photosynthetic, which means we started eating from the light. And then that eventually became to eukaryote, where we had to eat something to get our energy. This theory is called the endosymbiotic theory. Yes, you have to know this. Please make sure this is in your notes. Eukaryotic cells supposedly evolved from prokaryotic cells. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are very similar, right? Mitochondria gives us energy for animals, and chloroplast gives it for plants. But they say there was once independent prokaryotic bacteria cells. Prokaryotes are bacteria, which was eventually ingested by a larger host, which evolved to a eukaryote. So basically, they're saying, hey, one cell one day, he was hungry, he ate another cell. And once he realized he can eat cells, he became eukaryotic cells. Evidence is that mitochondria and chloroplast contain very similar DNA to the bacterial DNA. Now, biogenesis, bio is life, and genesis is the beginning. So the beginning of life, the idea that living organisms only came from other living organisms. And that's how we know. A tree cannot become a new tree or make a new tree unless it, throw its nuts and stuff down, and the seeds there begin to germinate and grow. And then we can't have kids unless we get with somebody of the opposite sex or be implanted with the opposite chromosome to create a child. So this is what we call biology, and this is where it all came from. Just a quick review of what we talked about. What is the term that describes that life comes from life? Biogenesis. So you don't have to really do it, but we match it. The protocell was with Sidney Fox. Um, this proves spontaneous generation. That was Louis Pasteur. So we're going on again to part 3, which will be our day 2 notes. But we're going to basically explain how natural selection leads to species to evolve and change over time. So first we got to figure out, who is this dude? This is Darwin, Charles Darwin. You got to know who he is, period, on the test. So he came up with our modern evolution theory, and the basics said species changed over time. That's what evolution means, change over time. He, for whatever reason, they want y'all to know what kind of boat he had. He had the HMS Beagle, and it took him. He started that journey at 21 years old, and he did it for 5 years. And everywhere he went, he collected specimens so he could have this protected. He went to the Galapagos Islands. Galapagos Islands is a small islands that was great interest of Darwin because it was very diverse. Look at the animals over there. Like, look at the blue feet. Look at these dragon lizards, and look at the crabs. Here's a map of where he pretty much traveled through. Okay. Here's another map of the Galapagos Islands. Think about it. It's not big. It's right over here by, you see how we have South America? Look at that small that island is. And he went here and found this big old diverse. Look at some of the animals. Look at this tortoise. You can ride these things. You won't go fast, but look at it. Underwater creatures. I promise you, if I was at the beach and saw that, that's it. No more water for me. But the biggest thing that Darwin looked at, he looked at finches, and what he looked at the finches was their beaks. Look at all their beaks. Same bird, different beaks, because on different parts of the island there was different sized trees. So Darwin, through the 22 years, worked to find an explanation of how things should change over time. And he didn't come up with this idea. He actually got this idea from Thomas Malthus, who was actually studying humans at the time, saying how human populations grow. Species will grow exponentially given unlimited resources. So as long as you got food to eat and you got money and stuff, you good to go. So basically, evolution of a species, chromosomes and gene mutations, and basically continuously and spontaneously happens, which creates a genetic diversity among species. It also leads to the survival that some species and depth extension of others based on the resources available and their ever changing the environment with the species life. The organisms that are favorable will survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. Over time, that accumulation and change in the favored alleles leads a species to change again and evolve. So after a while, like we all back in the day, we was actually considered giants. It was normal for people to be 6, 7, 8 feet, but it was not normal for them to be like 12, 13 feet tall, right? But for us now, we see somebody like 6'2", we be like, dude, that he's tall. Nah, like back in the day, it was we changed over time. But there's 2 types of selection. You have to know these 2. And again, I put in a star so you know. Artificial selection is nature provides a genetic variation, but humans select the variation they choose is found useful. So as you see here, nature has all this. The seeds are chosen. Once the seeds are chosen, over time, the quality of the crop increases. That's like, for me as a female, I'm in a room full of guys, and I get to choose the man that I want to be with. I get to choose. Nature provided me all these men that I can choose from, right? And it's the same with you. You can choose who you want to be with. And what happens is you do that and you make your own family and then keep on going from there. But now natural selection is what we know as the survival of the fittest. This is when organisms with certain genetic variations survive and pass through. This increases birth rate and decreases resources. All things compete. So if we're going to increase babies, we're going to obviously have our food sources limited. So look at the giraffes. Their necks actually, back in the day, used to be shorter than what they are now because the trees were so high. So they begin to reach and stretch their necks and their body begins to read that way. That's like when the doctors really tell you, hey, you may be sick. If you think that you're sick, you eventually get sick. You ever play sick to stay home? And then really you started getting sick, your body actually can produce that. It's the triggers inside of your mind. But what end up happening is it doesn't change as an individual, it changes as a population. Okay, and after a while, their necks were long enough for the trees because they kept passing this on. It was population. Now there's three types. You have to know these three types of natural selections. Please remember distribution of phenotypes in the population. This is again the phenotypes. What is phenotypes? What we see physically. All right. So stabilizing. Stabilizing is your average. Look at it. If you're stable, we're going to be in the middle. Short and simple. An example here is a lot of babies who are premature or small have birth, difficulties. They have to be on oxygen, they have to be under the light, their body isn't developed. Most babies who are big have difficulties during birth that can kill them because who better push out a 14, 15-pound baby? Nobody. Like, that's not about to happen. Most babies average between 5 and 8, 9 pounds, and that's normal. And they usually come out to be healthy. So directional is when we favor one extreme. So we just go in one direction. So you see how we start off with red and then we went to the blue. So basically, you see how this is talking about the birds with really big beaks. But let's just say that everybody in here had black and white shirts on. But I said the only people who have a white shirt on right now will survive. The black shirts would eventually die. What just happened is I chose one over the other. And that's what happened with the birds. We had the birds that had here with the smaller beaks in this one, and the environment said, hey, the big beaks is what we need, not the small beaks. Disruptive. So disruptive has both extremes, and this one has two humps. So this looks really disruptive, right? You have all this chart. So basically, there's no in between. It's either two of them. So we have a short beak and a long beak, and there's no medium beak. So the medium beak birds die in this one because the environment didn't feel like they needed to do that. It can be possibly competition for both, so they die off. So there's two types of adaptations. We have structural adaptations, which arise over time. Like it's over time, you're not just gonna wake up and have different teeth and claws and thorns and stuff growing. No, that is mimicry. Mimicry enables one species to resemble another. So you're trying to copy. Camouflage means you blend in. So this is a copycat, and this is my blender. Okay. Then we have physiological adaptations. Physiological can happen immediately. This is when you take medicine and your body begins to respond immediately. And it can change your metabolic processes within your DNA. So gene mutations, this can happen immediately. You get cancer, you ate something, it can change, or you was exposed to something, gene mutations happen immediately. So this is, again, bacteria resistance to penicillin. Like, once you're on antibiotics for so long, your body can get immune to it that quick. So this right here is mimicry. As you see, we have the monarch versus the vicary. Monarchs are bigger, but the vicary begin to mimic because if you eat a monarch, it becomes poison. So the vicary was like, I'm tired of getting ate. So it began over time. It took a long time for him to try to mimic what this looks like. But then, again, when you're at the doctors and they give you medicine, it happens immediately. So look at this picture. I want you to see if you can identify the animals. This is a stick bug. Okay, you see here, it's a frog, seahorse, a moth, a little spider, and then we have a frog.